Hello everybody, this is Mr. McKeever, and today we're going to talk about the Age of Exploration. Alright, so when we talk about the Age of Exploration, we're talking like really the beginning of the movement away from Europe in regards to trade kind of going in different places around the world. And this is happening largely because trade in Europe is getting increasingly expensive. Land routes from Asia to Europe are dangerous. There's a lot of robbers or people that could steal stuff on the way there. Or, the caravans or people trading themselves may just die on the trips. Also, a lot of the trade is being controlled by the Turkish empires that exist in the Middle East, and a lot of the Christian nations that exist in Europe at this time aren't really welcoming towards working with the Islamic nations that exist there. Really, everyone except for the Italians, who really just don't care as long as they're making money with this. So, with that in mind, the other European nations are going to look to expand their horizons in other ways. Try to find either sea routes that exist to Asia, or at least, maybe other markets that exist around the world. So, that's what happens. Our first real pioneer in this field is going to be a guy by the name of Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry is actually brother of the King of Portugal during this time. And because he's never going to inherit the throne of Portugal, he tries to embark on a different route in order for him to obtain a lucrative and exciting career in history. So first he's going to become a military general who will start to lead expeditions on the northern coast of Africa. And these expeditions will eventually take him outside of the Mediterranean Sea on the western portion of Africa. And because of this, he becomes rather adept at navigating in the Atlantic Ocean. And he's actually going to open a supposed school for those looking to navigate the oceans. And this is really going to become where the Portuguese start launching into the field of exploration. So the question becomes, why does he do this? Why doesn't he just live a life as a famous noble person in Europe? Well, the reality is people back then were looking for three things. One of which is going to be gold. The desire for gold is going to drive a lot of people outside of Europe looking for trade routes in hopes of making as much gold as possible. Well, also, he believed it was his mission from God in order to convert as many people as possible to Christianity. So these will be two of the driving features, and the other is glory. He is looking for a way to be remembered, a way to be immortalized in the history books of future generations, and to become that hero to his people. And this is going to be the same basic mindset that almost every European explorer is going to be using. So what is the impact of Prince Henry's navigational exploits? Well, we see him laying the foundation for future endeavors farther and farther away from the European continent. Back then, you have to remember how people viewed the world. If you can see from this map here, there's quite a few problems with how people viewed the world. One, the blaring issue is that there's just no American continents. They just didn't know those existed at this time period, even though earlier European civilizations did. We're also seeing just a view or misunderstanding on how large the actual world is. There's this belief that everything was much smaller back then, and that is a problem when it comes to exploring. They're going to assume that it's going to be a rather quick trip to Asia, and that's just clearly not the case. So what do our first early exploits look like? Well, we have two Portuguese explorers who are going to be very influential early on in developing some of the earliest trade routes. First, we have Bartolomé Dias, who's going to sail around the Cape of Good Hope of Africa. The Cape of Good Hope is the southernmost portion of Africa. And this is going to be great because it's going to be eventually a launching point then for our next explorer, Vasco da Gama, who will use that stopping point on the tip of Africa to make it all the way to India. And then from there, we're going to see the development of first European colonies in India. So we're building upon each other's ideas here. First, one person explores to the tip of Africa, the next person uses that to go all the way to India. But again, that's still kind of an expensive trip all the way around Africa to make it to India. So people are going to be looking for a shorter route, and that's where we get the Spanish jumping into the game. And of course, when we're talking about the Spanish, really, folks, we're talking about Christopher Columbus here. He's going to be our first truly influential Spanish explorer. And even more than anyone else during this period, he's going to leave a lasting impact on the Americas and on Europe as a whole. But what's a little bit of background about him? Well, he's not Spanish. It's a common misconception that Christopher Columbus is a Spanish person by birth, and he's not. He's Genoese or Italian, basically. And he's actually going to sail for the Portuguese early on in his career, and he actually develops a lot of the navigational techniques that he will eventually use in traveling across the Atlantic from the Portuguese. Well, due to the wonderful invention of the printing press, he's going to read some interesting pieces of literature about how the world is supposedly small, and that if you could just travel west from Portugal, you would eventually reach Asia. And this would be a quick and cheap route that the Portuguese could use to make a ton of money. So he's actually going to go to the King of Portugal and say, hey, I want to go travel west and find this cheap trade route. And the Portuguese king's like, dude, you're dumb. That's not really going to work. So he doesn't do it. So then he goes to Spain, to the monarchs there, Ferdinand and Isabel, proposes it to them, and they're like, no, that's stupid. He goes to the Italians, his native people, like, nope, also dumb. He will also then go to the French and the British, also asking them to commission a ship to go out west, and they all tell him no. They all think he's going to fall off the end of the world. Well, eventually he will go back to the monarchs of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabel, and ask them again, will you allow us to go west? And eventually the Spanish are like, all right, fine. Ferdinand and Isabella will commission Columbus sailing west from Spain in hopes of finding a cheap sea route to Asia. And everything's peachy, except not really. What we have here is a situation that has become immortalized in history, in that Columbus will sail to the Americas, and when he sails to the Americas, he encounters a few different peoples that are there. The first people he encounters when he lands on the island of Hispaniola is going to be the Taino people. And the Taino people are a small community of native peoples who live in the Caribbean on the various islands within the Caribbean. They had developed a rather peaceful trading network that exists there, largely based off of various resources, foods, crops, dyes, etc., and then a small amount of gold that they had found in the area as well. Well, when Columbus comes there, he is going to see all these wonderful things that exist in the Caribbean during this time period and believe that this is what he thought he was searching for. This is the Indies, this is Asia, except he doesn't find the gold that he assumed was going to be there. And what we have instead is an unfortunate reality. Shortly after the arrival of Columbus, pretty much every one of the native peoples in the Caribbean, the Taino people, are wiped out. The vast majority of them will be wiped out via disease. Smallpox will destroy the populations of the New World. And the rest are wiped out through various other methods, some more brutal than others. Some is slavery and forced labor systems that we will call encomiendas, but that's a story for a different day. We will also have people being hunted down for sport, and other ones will be just killed in violent acts. And unfortunately for the Taino people, that's kind of the end of their story. They're gone. But the end result of Columbus coming to the New World is something we call the Columbian Exchange, which is a truly monumental event in human history. Arguably one of the most important events in the development of humanity. There will be a massive trading of various resources from what we would call the Old World, which would be Europe, Africa, and Asia, to the New World, which we will call North and South America. And this transition of livestock, of foods, of technology, and of disease is going to radically change how the world existed back then and how it will exist from here on out. From the Old World to the New World, we see the transition of smallpox, which will wreak havoc on New World populations. We'll see the introduction of horses, cattle, and sheep, which is dramatically going to change how people can live in the Americas. And we see the introduction of wheat. Those are transformative changes in the livestock and agriculture of the continent. From the New World to Europe and Africa, we see the introduction of peanuts, which is huge, potatoes, which will become fundamental to the diets of various European civilizations, cacao, the basis of chocolate, and then probably more important than any of those, the introduction of tobacco. These things will also radically change the diets and environment of Europe as well. So this transition of new ideas, new items, crops, animals to one side of the world from the other is changing everything. But that's not the only story to be told when it comes to civilizations moving and changes taking place. In Mexico, we see the conquering of an ancient and extraordinarily powerful people. What exactly happens, we don't entirely know. But what we kind of know is the Spanish will introduce to Mexico a man by the name of Hernan Cortez. Cortez is a conquistador. His job is to conquer an area and explore it. Explore, then conquer. He's a military leader. He will arrive in Mexico years after the original explorations of Columbus, and when he arrives in Mexico, he finds the city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec people. And it is truly magnificent in every way, shape, and form. Whereas the Taino people did not have a lot of gold and wealth, the Aztec have it in abundance. And when Cortez arrives at their door, they believe that he is a god. He, according to their ancient myths of the Mayan Olmec people, they believe him to be the god Quetzalcoatl, and because of this, they invite him into a city, and then with the combined efforts of nearby enemies of the Aztecs, he will conquer the Aztecs and level the city of Tenochtitlan and replace it with a new city, which will become the capital of New Spain. Most of the Aztec people died because of smallpox during the consequent, after the original encounters, and because of that, they're crippled and really allow the Spanish to dominate the area. The remaining people are generally enslaved, and then eventually most of the Aztec culture kind of dies in the centuries since, though there are still some remnants of it today. And then also farther south, it's a nice picture of Cortez, the Cortesinator. We see the exploits of Francisco Pizarro. In a very similar story as to what happens with Cortez, Pizarro will travel south, find the Incan people in South America, and realize that they are even more wealthy than the Aztec were in Mexico. Then, after the introduction of smallpox ravaging the population, Pizarro will lead a bit of a war against the Incan people, capture their leader, and eventually execute him in conquering the area of South America and taking the wealth that is from the Incan people. And after this, we see the development of a massive Spanish empire in the New World. South America, along the line of Chile, all the way up through Peru, Colombia, up through Mexico, and into what we would call the United States today, will become Spanish territory, and what is at the time the largest colonial empire on the planet. And this is the first age of imperialism, of developing an empire for the benefit of a mother country. The Spanish will really be the first Europeans to do this on a large scale, but they won't be the last. This is going to be the new trend upon European nations to go outside of Europe and develop an empire that can be used to feed the mother country whatever resources and wealth it can in order to better serve and prosper the European mother. And on that, we are done with the Age of Exploration. Thanks and have a great day. Bye-bye.